I've been receiving a number of emails on prophecy issues again, which is a good thing. I'm beginning to see that we're making real headway in this area. I was on a week-long speaking engagement with a number of other speakers, and there was one particular fellow in the audience who didn't like my prophetic views, and he came to me afterwards and wanted to ask me some questions, and it was a little irritating because every time I would raise an issue, he would just kind of shrug his shoulders, and I finally said, "Why are you shrugging your shoulders? This is what the text says." And I find with lots of people dealing with subjects is they really don't know their system well enough, and they also don't know the criticisms of their system by other systems. This was also true of, I had gotten an email from a man, his sister-in-law had taken some issue with my book, Is Jesus Coming Soon? And I find with lots of people who engage me in debate over prophetic issues and other issues as well, that they really don't know what the issues are. And when they hear my position, it's jarring to them because they are in fact working with a system, and all they do is mouth a number of platitudes that they've heard, and they work within the circle in which they operate, because you will find that dispensationalists generally do not question other dispensationalists. They don't ask the hard questions. It only takes someone from outside the system to question. And this was Thomas Kuhn's point about paradigm shifts. Global warmist people don't want to deal with the issues. They're not going to ask the hard questions of those within the guild, within the system itself, because that would mean that they might not get funding anymore. So you're not going to find dispensationalists questioning other dispensationalists, because as soon as they do that, then there is a break with that group, and you may end up losing your job. Tommy Ice, I think, did this with Mark Hitchcock. He was a co-author with a number of books with Mark Hitchcock. And then Tommy questioned Mark Hitchcock on Ezekiel 38 and 39. Actually took my position on a portion of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Doesn't mean that Tommy changed his position on the whole, on both chapters, but essentially said Gary DeMar is right on here. I haven't seen Tommy writing any more books on Bible prophecy, and maybe there's some coming down the road, but I suspect because once this break takes place within the system, you're going to find people separating over it. And so when someone comes from outside the system, like myself, and questioning them, they fall back on the basics of their system. And this individual I spoke with for probably about an hour, going over all of these texts, and I said, now where in Scripture does it say this? Where does it say there's a gap between the 69th and 70th week? And I said, well, you need to show me a verse or a series of verses that postulate that there's a gap there. Or why is it that this generation means this in every other place, but on this particular passage it means something different? See, no one ever questions them about that. I come along and do it, and I get a shoulder shrug like that's really insignificant. But I keep pushing and pushing and pushing. I got an email from a woman who accused me of I'm like a dog with a bone, just protecting it. And I said, look, the integrity of the Bibles is at stake here. You go outside your little circle of friends, and you get someone like me questioning you about a prophetic issue. If you can't handle it, it may damage your faith. Same thing happens to young people when they're protected in the confines of their church and their Sunday school classes, and when they finally go off to college and they get hit with counter arguments. They don't know how to deal with it, and so they either retreat into an anti-intellectualism or they give up their faith altogether. So I want to deal with a couple of things that this person raised regarding my book, Is Jesus Coming Soon? She writes, I read that book you gave me this morning. She's talking to her brother-in-law. There are two huge problems with the author's thoughts. Number one, he bases the whole book on the verse in Matthew that says, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Then she goes on later on and deals with the dating of the book of Revelation. Well, if you've read any of my books are not just based upon the this generation phrase in Matthew chapter 24, 34. You'll also find it in Mark 13 and Luke 21. But that doesn't mean you can just ignore what the verse says. How does the New Testament, and particularly how does the Gospels, and even more particularly, how does Jesus use and understand the phrase this generation? How does he apply it? To what generation does it refer? It always refers, without exception, to the generation to whom Jesus is speaking. I remember doing a radio debate with Tommy Ice, and he said in every place this generation is used in the Gospels, it always refers to the generation to whom Jesus is speaking, except in Matthew 24, 34, which is nonsense. You got Matthew chapter 23, 36, where this generation is used, and it refers to the generation to whom Jesus is speaking. All of a sudden, Jesus changes the meaning of it one chapter later when he's dealing with the same context of when these things are going to take place. And throughout the Gospels, this generation always refers to the generation to whom Jesus is speaking. And then there's the use of the near demonstrative this generation will not pass away. If Jesus had a future generation in mind, he could have said, that generation will not pass away. He also used the second person plural throughout. When you see these things, when you see the abomination of desolation, and if this were a future generation, Jesus could have easily maintained that by saying, when they see the abomination of desolation. So he could have said, when they see these things and when that generation passes away. It would have been very, very easy for him to do that. And so basing an argument against the view that I hold, that Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, refers to events that happened in that generation, on my misapplication of this generation just doesn't hold water, because the way this generation is used elsewhere in the New Testament, or at least in the Gospels. Then she goes and she says, if you back up a few verses, Jesus says, now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs are tender and its leaves come out, know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that the time is near. This idea that this fig tree has something to do with the future of Israel sometime in the future, which she talks about here in the moment, it really does not hold water. But I want you to notice something, what verse 33 says. Jesus uses an audience reference in Matthew 24, 33. When you see all these things, recognize that he is near right at the door. When who sees all these things? When Jesus' present audience sees all these things. And these things refer to the signs, the things that are taking place in that chapter. Then you know realize that he is near right at the door. So it's the generation that sees these signs. Well, it's that particular generation that sees these signs. And then she goes on, she says, the fig tree has always been representative of the nation of Israel. It may be elsewhere, I don't know where. Hal Lindsey made the same point in his late great Planet Earth. But you can't make that claim from the Bible. The fig tree illustration in Matthew chapter 24 has nothing to do with Israel becoming a nation again. If you want to pick a tree that represents Israel in the Bible, in the New Testament, it's the olive tree in Romans chapter 11. Even John Walvoord says that the fig tree does not represent Israel becoming a nation again. He says, actually, while the fig tree could be an apt illustration of Israel, it is not so used in the Bible. And Mark Hitchcock takes a similar position in his book, 2012, The Bible and the End of the World, as well as his book, The Complete Book of Bible Prophecy. So my suggestion, if you're going to deal with a topic and you're going to come in opposition to a topic, make sure you know your position well and make sure you understand what the critics are saying about your position, and you have to deal with what the critics say.